essential that everyone understands what really happened that tragic day. During those moments, I remember thinking there was a very good chance I would be torn apart or shot to death with my own weapon.
There are some who express outrage when someone kneels while calling for social justice. Where are those same people expressing the outrage to condemn the violent attack on law enforcement, the Capitol, in our American democracy?
No one had ever called me a while wearing the uniform of a Capitol police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other Black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th. One officer told me he had never, and in his entire 40 years of life, been called a to his face, and that streak ended on January 6th.
You downplaying an event that happened to the country itself, to democracy, to the rule of law. You're talking about people who claim that they are pro-law enforcement, pro-police, pro-law and order, and then yet when they have the chance and the opportunity to do something about it, to hold people accountable, you don't.
The fence came down and still nothing has changed. Everything is different, but nothing has changed. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are being lauded as courageous heroes. And while I agree with that notion, why? Because they told the truth? Why is telling the truth hard? I guess in this America, it is. Us 4 officers, we would do January 6th all over again. We wouldn't stay home because we knew it was going to happen. We would show up. That's courageous.
Some of the highlights there are the emotional testimony from the police officers who were on the front lines of the assault on the Capitol, defending our democracy. You can sense just how incredibly intense this morning was for those officers, for the country, really. And I want to bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein, ABC News political contributor and staff writer at the Dispatch, Sarah Isgur, and former Democratic Senator and ABC News contributor Heidi Heitkamp for more on the political impact of this hearing. Welcome to all. And Heidi, let me begin with you, Senator Heitkamp. While Matt Rosendale, Congressman of Montana, Republican Congressman, was talking to Diane, you were reacting a little bit when he said he didn't listen to the officer's testimony, and he defended some of the people who were charged with crimes related to the rights. He says they were overcharged. What is your response to him?
My response is you've got to have a theory of your case. Okay, so were these tourists and good people who have now been drastically overcharged for their behavior? And, but now there was a serious security breach. And my reaction to Matt Rosendahl is, if you want to find out what the briefing was that day, ask Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell would know. Ask the president. They all got briefings, and they regularly get security briefings. So this idea that they're going to turn the focus on the security breach, it's inconsistent with their argument that these people were law-abiding citizens who have now been trapped into this, or trapped into this circular kind of thinking that the minority in the House has. And, I honestly felt like whatever happened in Montana, that they sent someone who would have such strong opinions and then likened the whole proceeding to some sports episode that, by the way, they don't play on our team. We're not going to tell them our little playbook over here. Well, the playbook ought to be about protecting and defending democracy. And he is one of the most pathetic examples of partisanship that is tearing our country apart. And so I would say to the good people in the state to the west of me, my goodness, take a look at that interview and say, does he really represent your values?
And those are some of the political stakes. Rick, let me go to you. Well, first, what stood out to you in these hearings, and why do you think they began with these officers?
Yeah, Terry, I think this was an attempt to just set a baseline, to make it as nonpartisan as you can at the beginning, to just get the officers to talk about their own experiences, their own judgments, and it resulted in some powerful pleas for accountability, some powerful stories, including some that we'd never heard before about racial epithets being hurled at officers, about the danger they themselves felt themselves in, how close they themselves came to death, and how they put themselves on the line at that moment. And I think it was intended, at least broadly, to rebut any efforts to try to whitewash the day, to try to redefine what happened on January 6th. Frankly, outside of that room, there was another reality being inhabited by a lot of Republicans that suggests that what happened that day either wasn't that bad or that somehow Democrats sort of blame for it. We heard that from Congressman Rosendale earlier in the program. And I think all of this was intended to set a baseline, to remind people of the horrors of that day, to bring people inside the room and to get the just visceral testimony of people on the front lines, literally under attack, seeing their jobs, their livelihoods, their lives threatened all at once by a marauding mob of people who wanted to overthrow the government. And just to establish that as the fact, you heard them say, please, members of Congress, hold people accountable for what happened.
And Sarah, Officer Dunn talked about why this event has become so political, saying the event itself was political because the people who attacked him and his colleagues said they were there because they believed President Trump's false claim that the election was stolen, and he says they were literally there to stop the steal. So given that, how does this committee now go about this in a bipartisan manner? Is that really possible?
I don't think it's possible at this point. I think with Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, they had an opportunity today to try to represent the Republican caucus that was not represented. I think that they did a wonderful job with the tone of the hearing, but unfortunately, it was not at all clear that they represented the Republican caucus. That makes it not bipartisan in that sense, especially after Pelosi asked not to have the two members that Leader McCarthy had, and so he removed all five. I think that where the rubber may hit the road here, though, is that the Department of Justice just said that former administration officials will not be able to invoke executive privilege to avoid testifying. It will be interesting to see how Republican members will react when Trump officials have to detail what happened behind the scenes that day. And I didn't watch, like they're answering today, isn't going to cut it when that happens.
And Heidi, let me pick up where Sarah left off there with the role that Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are playing there. And you represented North Dakota, a Democrat in North Dakota, which is increasingly rare, I guess. Do you think that Nancy Pelosi made a mistake in disallowing Jim Jordan and Jim Banks from being on the committee, and then thereby, because Kevin McCarthy then withdrew all the Republicans, we have a hand-picked Nancy Pelosi committee here? And as I said to Congressman Aguilar, we've seen plenty of congressional hearings where there are people out to vandalize it or undermine or have fierce partisan fights or just show off. That's Congress. But does it have more credibility when everybody's in the room, even if they're scrapping? What do you think?
You know, what I think is that's water under the bridge. The how people are going to react to the work of this committee is going to depend on the work of the committee. And so if in fact they get to why was it so easy for people to breach security? Why weren't you listening to a lot of people? In fact, I remember, Terry, we were on that day on January 6th, and I kept saying this should not be happening, that the security should have been amped up. Anyone knew that this was going to be problematic. And so I think those are important questions. And if they delve into those questions, if they make sure that nobody gets whitewashed, this is all going to be all hands on deck to find out what happened, I think the work of the committee will speak for itself. And I think history is going to judge those people who voted against a bipartisan commission, those people who voted against certifying the president. Those people are going to, only for one reason, not because it was the right thing to do, but because they want to express loyalty to the former president of the United States. I think that is going to speak volumes in the rear view rearview mirror of where we are today, and history will judge them. And they should all remember history will judge them. And it's not going to be whether Nancy Pelosi put somebody on this committee that denied all of this. It's going to be what actually happened that day. And I look forward to further committee hearings. I think today set the right tone. And I want to congratulate the chairman and want to congratulate all of the members, especially the two Republican members, who care more about the Constitution and our democracy than their political futures.
And Rick, I want to go back to a comment that Congressman Rosendale made, because he did complain of some people being overcharged in the events on January 6th, but also made clear that he thinks anyone who inflicted any damage of property or any violence against officers or anybody else should absolutely be charged to the full length of the law. So I wonder if it might help, if you think it might help the spirit of bipartisanship, at least, if Democrats draw a stronger distinction between the people that are being referred to as terrorists throughout the course of this hearing and the people who on January 6th just showed up for what they thought would be a peaceful rally. And when people started storming the Capitol and things went awry, they kind of backed up and said, whoa, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah, I think the Democrats are going to largely leave law enforcement actions to law enforcement entities and to allow those prosecutions, hope that those prosecutions go forward, let the Department of Justice, let other law enforcement agencies work their way that way. This isn't going to be about establishing who put whose feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk or establishing criminality when it comes to individual actions. I think there's a recognition that that's going to be done outside of the halls of Congress. This is about what holes there were in the security system up and down the chain, whatever those questions can lead to, what people knew when they knew it, and of course political accountability. Congress is the only entity that really is going to have that opportunity to look at what members of Congress, what members of the Trump administration were saying in real time. Those are key questions. We heard Congressman Aguilar earlier say he's not going to rule out any subpoenas. To me, it's critical that they find out at some point, and I think there's going to be significant pressure on the committee to go to find out what the White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was saying, to find out what Kevin McCarthy's conversation with President Trump was really like, Jim Jordan, other members of Congress who have said they talked to the president. Those are the kind of questions I think they're going to try to go after as they stitch together a narrative. You heard the focus on documents. That's part of this as well. They want to know what paper was traded, what emails. I think there's going to be a lot of details, a lot of nitty gritty in filling that out. For now, it's about just hitting those emotional chords, reminding people, resetting people 6 months later where things stand. And you're right, Diane, there's been a whole lot of law enforcement activity, some 500 cases out there pending. And I don't think there's anyone in that room or outside that room that thinks that shouldn't proceed that way. I think when you've got Republicans talking about people being overcharged and accountability at DOJ, that's just a smokescreen.
And Rick, the Department of Justice said this morning that former Trump administration officials are allowed to participate in this investigation. That's a shift from what we saw during the impeachment hearing. So can they be compelled to testify? And might that include former President Trump himself?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah knows best as a former DOJ spokesperson, but that is a big deal for the Department of Justice to say they're not going to stand in the way. That means that if individuals want to litigate that and fight it out with Congress, they're going to essentially be on their own dime. They're going to have to pay for that themselves. They're not going to have the Justice Department or other federal agencies stepping in the way. And yes, it quite possibly could include the former president under certain guidelines, certain auspices. Now, we've seen standoffs like this before, and frankly, it's very easy for a witness with the right resources and the right backing, either political or otherwise, to wait out the clock on congressional committees. Even the impeachment hearings, both sets had a lot of frustrations in that regard. But this removes at least an initial legal barrier, and it puts a lot of pressure on those former administration officials to comply with any kind of subpoena that they get, or cooperate and to voluntarily decide to appear before a congressional committee that calls them. So I do think this opens the floodgates quite a bit, and it's an important marker in this investigation.
Well, let's go to Sarah, former Trump administration official prior to January 6th, on the question that Rick and Diane were just discussing, this Justice Department, the Biden Justice Department opinion that there is no bar to these former officials testifying before Congress. What do you think of that? And what do you think of the current GOP leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy? Of course, he once said he would testify, and now he's turned, completely around. Do you think he would be able to be subpoenaed? What's your view on that?
So Congress can subpoena anyone they'd like. The question is what barriers that person can throw up to the subpoenas. Former administration officials believed that they would be able to cite executive privilege and not testify. What the Department of Justice did today was say, no, no executive privilege. Now, Donald Trump could still sue to try to prevent them from testifying, arguing that the privilege, in fact, belongs to him. I think that's an uphill argument, but as Rick pointed out, delay can be all you need in this type of game. Don McGahn didn't have to testify during the impeachment hearing under this sort of exact scenario. But I think that overall, as much as it pains me in some ways to say this, but politically speaking, Nancy Pelosi made a mistake here, and she handed Kevin McCarthy a get-out-of-jail-free card, for lack of a better metaphor, when she nixed the 2 members of the Republican committee. And that allowed Kevin McCarthy to then pull all 5 and say, well, if she won't take all of them, we're going to remove all of them. By doing so, it allowed the Republicans, led by McCarthy, to say this committee has no credibility with Republicans and allow them and their voters to tune this out. If the committee doesn't have credibility, I agree with Senator Heitkamp that all of this will be viewed through the lens of history someday. But it won't be if no one's watching, and if no one is hearing what's happening, and no one's tuning into the testimony or even engaging with it. Yes, having Jim Jordan or Representative Banks at this hearing would have changed the dynamic considerably. But it also would have then lent it credibility, where everyone would have had to engage with this. It would have had credibility with half the country that now gets to say, oh, that? No, I don't even know what's going on with it.
All right, Heidi Heitkamp, Sarah Isgur, Rick Klein, thank you all. Great conversation. We appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.